Knowing how your menstrual cycle works is really useful whether you're trying to get pregnant naturally or you need fertility treatment to try to get pregnant. And the menstrual cycle is driven by hormones, and what we're going to cover in the next few minutes just is how those hormones drive what's happening during the cycle. So the cycle begins when you have your period. This is usually called day 1 by the clinics, and it's usually the day when you have the first complete day of bleeding. At the beginning of your cycle, levels of the hormone FSH are quite high, and it acts on the pool of follicles that are present in the ovary. Now, there's always quite a lot of medium-sized follicles ready in the ovary to be responsive to FSH when it's higher. So these follicles start growing, and as they grow they get bigger, and they also make a hormone called estrogen. Estrogen feeds back on the FSH, which lowers the level of FSH. So only the follicles which are growing the fastest keep growing in response to the falling FSH levels. After about 10 days or so, one of the follicles is going to be much bigger than the others, and it sends a signal to the pituitary gland in the brain to say, hey, I'm ready to ovulate. And the pituitary gland responds by sending a surge of the hormone LH. Now, the LH surge is really important, and it does a whole lot of things in the ovary. It finishes the maturation of the egg, it changes the hormones that are being made by the follicle from estrogen to progesterone, and the follicle pops, which is ovulation. The first half of the cycle is known as the follicular phase because it's dominated by the follicle, and the second half of the cycle is called the luteal phase because the follicle, once it's had the LH surge, is called the corpus luteum. The progesterone that the corpus luteum makes ensures that the lining of the uterus is receptive for an embryo if there's one to implant. Over the next few days, the corpus luteum keeps making progesterone, but it becomes increasingly unresponsive to the LH coming from the brain, and if it doesn't get any other signal, you'll have your period. So basically, the progesterone made by the corpus luteum will fall off. However, if you have an embryo that's implanted, it sends its own signal called HCG, and that rescues the corpus luteum and enables you to have a pregnancy. So that's what happens in a natural menstrual cycle. What happens in an IVF cycle? Well, we give injections of FSH throughout the follicular phase, and this supplements what would normally happen from your own pituitary gland. So instead of just one follicle developing, a whole lot of follicles develop, often 6, 10, maybe even 15. Now, in the natural menstrual cycle, you can ovulate any time of the day or night. The LH surge can occur any time. But in IVF, obviously, this is relatively inconvenient, so we give some hormones to stop this happening. And instead, we trigger ovulation with an injection of the hormone HCG, which is called the trigger injection. Because of these hormones, you also need to support the second half of the cycle with luteal support, which is usually given as progesterone as a vaginal suppository.